Hi, this is Stephanie Stock, President of Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom and Citizen Advocate for Conservative Policy and the Protection of Our Constitutional Liberties. Welcome to this week's episode of Stephanie Stock Straight Up. Today we have Dustin Herman with us. He is a partner with Spangenberg, Shibley, and Lieber. Hopefully I said that right, which is based out of Cleveland. Dustin currently lives in Tampa and handles cases in both Florida and Ohio. Much of his practice concentrates on medical malpractice, nursing home cases, pharmaceutical and medical device litigation, and product liability cases, which is the subject of HB 126 that we're covering today. Dustin is on the executive committee for the National Trial Lawyers Top 100, and he is on the board of trustees for the Ohio Association for Justice, and that's how I came to find him. Today, he's here to discuss how public nuisance liability protection for products under HB 126 relates to data centers and the ability for local municipalities to recover taxpayer-related costs. So, Dustin, I'm going to let you take the floor and kind of just go over 126 a little bit. What is product nuisance? What do these nuisance suit means? What does that look like to voters? And we'll just kind of go from there on expanding on some examples for how this affects us with data centers.
Sure. So public nuisance lawsuits are, we've had them in the common law for hundreds of years. It is the government's ability to say to a corporation or an individual person, you made a mess and it's costing the taxpayer money. And either we are going to have to clean it up and get reimbursed from the person or corporation, or make the person or corporation clean it up. You can think about examples of polluting the environment are classic examples. Back in the day, there was like malaria ponds where people have old ponds and mosquitoes would just brew and they would fester, and the government would have to come in and clean up that mess. Drug houses in cities are often condemned as public nuisances, and the city has to come in and clean them up. But it can be any type of mess caused by any activity. And so recently, and I was heavily involved in the opioid litigation, and the manufacturers of these pills pushed as many pills as they could into our communities. And they did so for years and years while knowing that people were overusing these and pushing them onto the black market. And it was just a cyclical thing, which there have been close to $100 billion in settlements. I think it's just over 70 now. I think eventually we will see over 100 billion in settlements where these companies, both the manufacturers, the distributors, pharmacies, and other companies, basically acknowledged we caused a huge mess, causing cities and counties having to deal with people dying, kids in foster homes, police and enforcing, arresting people for drugs, the criminal justice system, so much strain on our local communities from this crisis. And the companies reimbursed the cities and counties. It's now $70 billion for all of this, the cities and counties having to clean up this mess. So that's the opioid litigation. In Ohio has received about $1 billion of those settlements that went to the state of Ohio, local cities, and local counties to reimburse them for all the costs that they have had to spend for dealing with the opioid crisis. That case went to the Ohio Supreme Court. There was a trial against some of the pharmacies that had already agreed to pay out settlements, and it went up to the Ohio Supreme Court. And the issue there was, can you bring a public nuisance lawsuit in Ohio under the current law? And the Ohio Supreme Court essentially said, well, if it deals with the product, it's got to go through the Ohio Product Liability Act. And they said that because they said that's what the legislature seems to have said back in 2007 when they added this new definition of what a product liability claim was, and included public nuisance lawsuits that are related to products. And the Ohio Supreme Court said, look, we don't get to make policy choices. We have to interpret the statute as the legislature has written it. And it seems that that's what the General Assembly wanted to do. And if the General Assembly wants to change it, they can change it. Now, H. Bill 126 is the legislature saying, we are going to not only codify that Supreme Court decision and make a statement that says, we definitely don't want any lawsuits affecting that are related to products and public nuisances. We don't want them in Ohio. But they're also expanding that decision and expanding the limitations on public nuisance lawsuits by getting rid of what's called statutory public nuisance lawsuits when they're related to a product. So cities have historically, and now in statute, have had the ability to remedy a public nuisance. And they have the power to do that through statute is one mechanism, and common law is another through the court systems and through courts of equity. Now with this bill, they're not going to be able to do any of that. And so if we turn this looking towards the future and future potential public nuisance lawsuits, essentially in Ohio, this bill would say anything that deals with a product, if a product is causing a mess in the community, causing havoc in the community, there's nothing that the government, that the taxpayers can do to get their money back when the taxpayer has to spend a bunch of money to clean up a mess. So when we talk about the data centers I'll come to, but when we think about products and the new wave of products and what's coming down the pipe, we've got AI, we've got robots, we've got self-driving cars.
Yeah.
AI, what it's going to do in the future, we don't know. We know it's not going to be perfect. We know it's going to malfunction. We see it malfunctioning and causing havoc in even in the regulators' hands. And the government and the taxpayer is going to have to come in, and it's going to cause problems. The taxpayer is going to have to fix. In Ohio, under this bill, the cities and counties in the state of Ohio can't do anything about it.
It seems a little bit crazy too, because we have this huge push in Ohio. They really want to bring a ton of the data centers here. And we already don't have, we don't have safety regulations on these data centers, and we don't know what's going to happen long term: water, air quality, noise pollution, all those types of things. Nobody really knows how bad it's going to be. And then now it looks like they're trying to close the only available pathway left for municipalities to have any recourse. I mean, it seems pretty nefarious, and to not explain that to people. I mean, most people don't even know what public nuisance lawsuits are. I mean, I didn't find out about, what this bill could do until a week or two ago. And I thought, my gosh, this is terrible. And the people have no idea, because the legislature just does these things. And they sell these bills to members, using other things to do it. I mean, one of the things this bill was sold for was, it's things like when gun manufacturers get sued because there's a shooting or something. And that's not even we already have protection from that. So why are they using examples that we already have protection for to sell a bill that removes liability for things that are up and coming, and we don't even know what the effects are, and they're going to give them blanket liability out of the gate? It's crazy that that they would be pushing for this. And I'm glad we connected, because we've got to get this message out to the voters, because this is going to affect them directly in their communities.
It will. And as far as the data centers go, those servers are products. They are tangible things. And, in the future, if they do, let's say, use up a ton of a community's water, and I, as a lawyer, we're going to seek to file a public nuisance lawsuit because the government either wants to come in with an injunction and stop them, or it has to it has to supply water to residents, and it costs the local government or the taxpayers a bunch of money. I would come in and I would if I tried to file a lawsuit, they would say it's out. You throw it out of court because the cities, counties don't have the ability to file public nuisance lawsuits against these tech companies because a server is a product, so it falls under OPLA, the Ohio Product Liability Act. Mm-hmm. And just draining, using up all the water is not pollution or contamination to the environment. There is a carve out for pollution or contamination to the environment in the statute. We had to fight for that. They tried to remove that. We had to fight for that in the House. And then we actually worked with Representative Matthews to get that carve out back in so that we wouldn't be eliminating the ability to bring public nuisance actions for the contamination of the environment. And I was appreciative, at least that for that step. But they have an extremely strong argument that this is a product and it's not contaminating the environment, and therefore the government is basically can't do anything about it when it costs the government a lot of money to come in and fix what these tech companies are doing.
Yeah, and that's a real concern, and I'm really shocked that they would include the environmental portion, I mean, out of the gate, that the bill initially included no recourse for environmental damage. That's nuts. I mean, and I will say this this bill was written by the Chamber of Commerce, and they're the definitely the enemy of medical freedom, and they're certainly proving to be the enemy on other issues as well. It's just I'm shocked that they would do that. But again, I don't think that the majority of the legislators in the House that voted for this had a real complete understanding of what this does in real world terms. I think I don't know that they would have had the votes if you and I had had this discussion before it left the House. But we've just got work to do now, I guess.
Yeah, it's the talking points that I hear are we want to curb unfair lawsuits, and the conversations that I've had with legislators is, look, they think that the way to curb unfair lawsuits is to just wholesale blanket abolish a category of lawsuits. And they say, well, if we abolish all of them, then we can't have the unfair ones. But they're getting rid of the fair ones too. And so that's the talking point, was just getting rid of unfair ones. Well, no, you're not. You're getting rid of a ton of legitimate lawsuits with them. And I think, from the Chamber's perspective, they think that's good policy. Minimize lawsuits no matter what the cost, and let the corporations just, be leave them to their own devices, and they're going to just do good for everybody. And we know that doesn't happen. We know it didn't happen in the opioid litigation. And when the pharmaceutical company does something like that again, which we know they will, Ohio will not be able to hold them accountable at all. If big tech does things with AI, if self-driving cars just cause havoc, they all shut down at one time and there's crashes along the highway, and there's huge chaos caused, and paramedics and first responders and all these services that the taxpayer has to come and spend to deal with that. There's nothing that the taxpayer can do to recoup those costs. If there's an individual person is hurt in that kind of chaos, the individual person can bring a lawsuit, but the taxpayer cannot recoup their costs. And that's the big issue with the bill. Individuals can still go collect, but if you cause a public nuisance with cost to the public, and actually, I'll tell you, J.D. Vance, was on the Joe Rogan podcast about, I would say this was, I think it was October of 2024, right before the election.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about what was essentially the language of public nuisance lawsuits. And what he said was, you can't have these corporations privatizing the profits of what they're making from their products, but then socializing the expense across the country. When your products cause harm, you should have to pay for that harm. You can't privatize the profits and socialize the cost. And that's exactly the type of remedy that public nuisance lawsuits provide. In the in the academic world, they call it externalizing the risk. Is you make all the money, and if it's harming the environment, or it's harming uh, people out in the community, but it's not harming your business, you've externalized the risk, but internalized, privatized the profits. And that's what public nuisance lawsuits are designed to prevent. And this bill just gets rid of it. It reinforces the opioid decision, it expands the opioid decision, and it gets rid of statutory public nuisance claims, which didn't we weren't even that was not the crux of the opioid litigation. So this goes well beyond what the opioid case did, and that's another talking point that we hear about this bill, is that it's a mirror image of the Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court decision in the opioid case, and it's just not true.
Yeah, and they reference it in the bill. They reference the Supreme Court decision. And when I read it, I thought, well, okay, so you guys are looking at this one piece, right? This one piece, and you're using this one piece of the puzzle to try to sell this massive, like, okay, we're just gonna we're gonna basically ban all of these potential lawsuits over this. And they really sold it with just that ruling. And I thought that's very misleading, to expand it like that and to give this blanket immunity using this one talking point. But that's kind of a standard that I see a lot of times with legislation. They use one narrative to sell something that's a much bigger picture and can has much broader effects on the public than what they even know and what the legislators even know. And unfortunately, really bad bills get passed that way sometimes. So it's great that you're kind of mentioning some of these talking points, because as people are emailing the Senate Judiciary Committee members, they're getting these talking points back, and I'm sure that's a sheet that the chamber wrote directly and they passed it on. And they're giving these kinds of talking points. Well, now you just don't understand. It's not going to do that, pat you on the head kind of thing. But I mean, I think this is very clear. What you're saying is very clear. We are definitely throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. And if they have issues with things that are, whether they're, frivolous or whatever, then pinpoint some of those issues and tackle those. But stop this idea of this insanity of blanket immunity for things, because there's a couple of problems. Like, we need to do better than that. Like, put your heads together, folks, and come up with something that maybe does what you want, that doesn't have all these other negative impacts. And unfortunate that this bill exists. But I appreciate you explaining it to people a little bit more. It can be a little complicated to describe it. I'm not sure if I did as well as you have done when I'm trying to put up these call to actions, but I do appreciate that you've testified against this bill, that you're bringing it out. Thank God you were there to get the provision removed regarding the environmental effects. I mean, that would have been catastrophic.
Yeah, my suspicion is that Representative Matthews did not realize it had that effect,
He probably
uh,
didn't.
but that the chamber did.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, that's my suspicion.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the problems when we have lobbyists writing bills. It's This is what happens. People need to put their heads together with some of the folks that are in our own camp when they're writing this kind of legislation and say, "Hey, how could the bad side use this against us? I know we wanted our intent is this." You hear that a lot. Well, our intent of this bill is to do. Well, your intent means nothing. It's the language that counts. So we need to get away from intent and start looking at actual language that does what it says it's going to do and doesn't do more. I think, unfortunately, I don't even think there's a way to fix this bill. I think it just has to die. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's like a couple change ups that you can make and like make this bill be good.
Um, no, I have changes that I want to make to the bill that would actually do the reverse of what they're trying to do with the bill. So that's not going to go anywhere. Uh,
No.
but the issue is that the under the Ohio Product Liability Act, it has always been the case that individuals can sue, but you have to suffer physical harm to your body or damage to your personal property. And if you don't have one of those, then you are always free to sue outside of OPLA, and you could bring other types of lawsuits. And when the legislature in 2007 brought public nuisance lawsuits within OPLA, they didn't say anything about whether you could sue for only economic damage or only abatement, equitable relief, which is what governments do when they're suing for public nuisance. This is equitable abatement. Abatement just means cleaning up your mess. Either the government doing it themselves and getting reimbursed, or making the corporation pay to do it. And the way the Ohio Supreme Court and the way the legislature wrote this, or the way the Ohio Supreme Court interpreted what the legislature wrote, is actually this eliminates any ability for anybody to recover solely economic loss or equitable abatement. So you can't just recover money. And that's really what is the problem when it comes to public nuisance claims brought by governmental entities and the taxpayer. Individuals can still sue through these statutes, but the government cannot, because the government is, if the government's building gets harmed, the government could sue for damage to its own building. But if it's providing services because it has to do additional things that it wouldn't have had to do without the problems with the product, it can't sue for that. And that's always been a power the government has had for hundreds of years. And this bill is taking it away.
Yeah, and one of the things that popped into my head was when you're mentioning that building is, if you do have an issue with, and there's multiple states that are having massive issue with water pressure with the data centers, right? So if we have to build new water towers to increase the water pressure for everybody that's living there because they have a trickle coming out of their shower and they're not real happy about it, we pay for that.
Yep.
The city pays for that structure to be built, and the data center just operates business as usual. So that kind of stuff is very possibly going to happen. I mean, it's not like this is theoretical. We are seeing around the country this type of thing. Now, I don't know if noise pollution or any of that falls into this category, or if that's a separate thing, if that's considered environmental. But I mean, there's just so many issues that could potentially come up, and we don't even know what all of them are yet, because this is a growing and developing like AI, and all this is all just coming down the pipeline, and it's coming fast, and we don't know what we're going to encounter. We don't want to be blocking off any possibilities of things that would give citizens ability to recoup losses.
That's what's scary. I'm looking at AI is the big thing, and we don't, as you said, we don't know what's coming around the corner. But what we do know is that this bill is going to give tech companies immunity. Both, you can't file statutory public nuisance lawsuits, and you can't file common law public nuisance lawsuits. And that the legislature is giving immunity to big tech. Now, again, individuals can sue for their individual harm. They're allowed to do that under OPLA, but governments cannot.
Okay. And as far as like any kind of a massive data breach or anything like that, would that fall into a public nuisance? Like if there was a massive data breach, or if there were, I think you mentioned something about financial, like if there was causes a crash in any systems, that would fall under that.
So it's really it's what is the government having to pay out of pocket to do? So if a data breach caused the government to have to spend its own money to fix the problem, then yes, those would be the damages that the government could not get back. If it's
Okay.
a data breach, it's kind of like from the legal side of this, we're going to say, what are the damages? What is it? How did it hurt you? So I don't know about a data breach, exactly how that would hurt the government. It would hurt the individuals for the data breach. If it caused the government to have to um, go in and fix its systems and spend a bunch of money on new networks and things. I'm not sure. There's a lot to unpack there. If they're collapsing the financial system, and I'm thinking that's going to cause chaos and havoc. Just like AI can cause chaos and havoc, just like self-driving cars going haywire can cause chaos and havoc. And then the government is going to have to spend money to
Yeah.
help maintain order, clean up the mess, those types of things. So that's really what it's about. If it's a taxpayer, and it's not the government's money, right? It's the taxpayer's money. If the taxpayer has to spend money to deal with issues caused by a product, um, the taxpayer should be able to say, "Pay us back." And this bill says, "Nope, you can't say that anymore."
Yeah. Well, we definitely need to keep our nose to the grindstone on this. We have sessions going to be out, I think, the second week of June. And then I believe they're coming back again in November. So I'm sure if this bill hasn't gotten out of committee, they're probably going to try to shove it through in a, you know, lame duck kind of situation where who knows. So we're going to have to definitely keep eyes on this. So we'll we'll be in touch, you and I'm sure, as we continue to fight 126 and protect the citizens' rights to have a legal pathway forward on this. I think it's really, really important. So I appreciate your time. I hope that everyone will follow Ohio Advocates for Medical Freedom for calls to action on HB 126. Make sure that you are continuing to hound those members and let them know that you do not want this bill to move forward. Dustin, thank you again so much for your time and for all of your work that you're doing to protect citizens. You guys are so important, and especially when you're doing this kind of work, it's really important because you are protecting the citizenry. So we appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Stephanie.